Hi, everyone. My name is Claudia Claudio. I'm the project assistant for PCCEP.
Okay, I think that was everyone. Unless there's a number, the person on the phone wants to, it could be someone else's, be Barb's phone number. No?
I think they unmuted themselves.
Barb's, oh,
There are two Barbs. We see
Barb
that.
and Barb are the same person, two machines, lack of trust. Okay, not you guys, technology.
Got it. Okay, so we're gonna get started. I just because of the what we've experienced in the last week, I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge the lives that continue to be lost at the hands of law enforcement across this country and in our community, and really take a moment for the young Black girl that was killed after calling police, and just having a reminder that, Say Her Name was created for Black women and girls, because their stories are so often downplayed. And here we are. So I just want to take a really brief moment to honor the people who've lost their lives in the last week. All right. I hope everyone takes a really deep breath, because it's been, I felt that it's been really heavy this lately. So what we have on the agenda today, I'm gonna pull this up here, is we wanted to debrief just the STOPS data kind of conversation that we had and do some Q&A around that. Then we wanted to just go over the last couple of years of the Racial Equity Subcommittee. We don't have a ton of community representation on here tonight, but for those of you who are here, I still think that your perspective is very important. So I don't know that this piece about STOPS data will take the entire time. And then the second portion of this meeting this evening is really to talk about the future of the Racial Equity Subcommittee and how the community feels we can develop it. I think I announced last time, if not, I will be stepping down as the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee and working with PCCEP staff to develop a smooth transition for new leadership opportunities. And so if folks have ideas or thoughts about that, we'll get into that here in a little bit. So I don't have the presentation from the STOPS data, and I don't think folks are, except for Mary Claire, is here to talk about that. If you had, we had hoped to meet with the Chief Assistant Chief Davis last week, but due to the officer involved shooting, that meeting was canceled. And so I was hoping that that meeting would help us frame kind of this dialogue about STOPS data and how we could bring it together. I shared some thoughts with Mary Claire, but we were not able to get those things done in order to really frame this conversation out. So I would open it up to folks if you have thoughts and suggestions. The question today really is, if we were to host a facilitated dialogue about the STOPS data, what specifically would we want to know, so that it would help me or whoever's facilitating effectively facilitate the responses that people are hoping to get. I'm going to open that up for you all to comment. There's whether community or PCCEP members.
I'll go first.
I see you, Barb.
I counted to more than 7. I think that since things are changing, that a good thing to do might be to look at the STOPS data that we have. We're given whatever, and say, this is missing and that is missing, and this, you know, that kind of thing. Knowing that things are in flux, but making suggestions. I don't know. Does that make sense? Nobody's nodding, so my screen must be frozen.
I think your screen is frozen because we were all, I think we all nodded at the same time. Um,
Thanks, you guys.
and there is a 2019 STOPS data report. I don't know if there's anything newer than that, but yeah, there is. All right, I'm looking at this. That is one strategy, Barb. Thank you. I'm taking notes, by the way.
We just had a couple people jump on. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is related to STOPS data. So what does community, what would you like to better understand about STOPS data? And I know I did not frame that the same way. And if we were to facilitate a meeting with Portland Police Bureau, kind of what would you want to know, and how would you want that, like how would you want to give feedback around issues related to STOPS data?
Just for a little context too, you know, there's a lot of disproportionate, if you haven't looked at the STOPS data, it's very disproportionate in the stops of individuals of color, specifically Black people, and I want to say Pacific Islander. And so that's why me and Marcia have been talking about having a presentation be part of this. And there's also been, you know, in some of the smaller presentations or comments that PPB has given, they've talked about explanations for why that is. So we want to put together some kind of presentation that could be done by the Racial Equity Subcommittee, but we want it to also be constructive. So that's kind of why we're asking, like, what would you guys want to see? What would you want to be discussed? Things of that nature.
Yeah, and Barb, good question in the chat. So I think that's what we would want the community to inform, and we would. My hope was to get some feedback from you all and bring it back to PPB to kind of facilitate this what this conversation would look like. We would want to clarify if we're talking about traffic data or pedestrian stops. And you know, in the past, the feedback was in 2019 we had a dialogue with the GVRT team where folks felt like the Bureau was unable to really talk about STOPS data effectively and meaningfully. And I think that was also noted in the last meeting that we had, where we heard from the community engagement office. And I think this would be to really talk about what the community is experiencing, and kind of dropping this narrative that Black people or Pacific Islanders are, you know, doing XYZ more, and being more transparent and real about the data that we are seeing, and get questions that define what type of stops there are, where the mirror conversations come in, how they're tracking it, and we can then develop recommendations to, you know, improve how they're collecting data, which I think was a suggestion from the DOJ as well. Do others have additional thoughts or comments?
Looks like Rochelle has her hand raised.
Yes, I'm hoping that you can do something more than take a quantitative approach and count numbers of stops. I think everybody saw all the videos about George Floyd's being stopped, and what the officer said to him and how he was approached, which is not likely to be the same approach that the officer would do if it were, I'll just say, a white woman that he was coming up to talk to. And so I would really like to get people who have been stopped and have them talk about what that was like for them. Because I'm guessing that everyone who is on this call at the moment who has been stopped, and we probably all have, has a different story to tell. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. And I also want to acknowledge that I know Commissioner Hardesty recently hosted an event specifically for Black men. And the question was at what age they were when they had their first encounter. And that was a really powerful event that took place just a few weeks ago. And many of the men that spoke, who were Black men, were very young, and many of them talked about their experience with having a gun pulled on them. So it was very powerful, and I agree that that narrative is important. I can't see if other people have their hands up, so I would just offer that people jump in.
Okay, I'll jump in again. Feeding off of Rochelle's idea, I think that we have to be careful about people re-traumatizing themselves. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying, one, make sure that it's a trauma-informed environment, including having peers available. And also, I guess, asking people to do it who are more resilient and hardened to what they've gone through and have dealt with it, rather than people who are likely to, melt down discussing it as they're speaking, which I agree can be powerful. But to me, that fits in with the traumatic part, unless, because sometimes that happens. People haven't done it before, and then they go to do it and they're really surprised about the feelings that come back. So another 2 cents.
Yeah, I think you're right, Barb. I think it's really important to acknowledge that and be trauma informed. So that's a really great point. Thanks for mentioning that. Any others have questions or thoughts that they'd like to add, or anything that would be helpful on behalf of Portland Police? What I don't think we have anybody from the Bureau, except we have Mary Claire, about what that could look like.
I'm back to asking them what's going on now.
I just wanted to chime in and, take it or leave it. I do think there's an important sort of preliminary step, and you both have already hit on it, Lakiana and Marcia, about, bridging this divide where there's no acknowledgement of the current disparity, because Portland Police as an organization and several, I think a lot of individual officers will believe they have adequate justification for the stop. And, from my perspective as a lawyer, a constitutional and civil rights lawyer, disproportionality alone isn't enough to show a constitutional violation. You have to look at the reasons for the stop. Now, aside from that, I think there's a very powerful, narrative and, to understand the harm that even if a stop is justified, if the manner of the stop is done in a way to, guns drawn when they don't necessarily need to be, or rudeness or aggressiveness, that all has trauma. And I think that, a town hall to get that, those stories out is very important for officers to hear. So, even if you have justification for a stop, you don't have to make every stop, but as a preliminary matter on the disproportionality, understanding the reasons that the Bureau thinks, are solid for this disproportionality would be important to put a light on from my perspective.
Thanks, Jared. I think those are really good points, and I'm looking away because I'm taking notes. But that is really important, and I've taken that down. I agree. Do others have any more thoughts on this? So I heard a town hall and getting feedback from folks impacted directly from stops, specifically people of color, maybe specifically Black people. Do folks feel like we should move on to the next topic, or are there any last comments about the stops? And just so you know, this will inform, you know, how we frame out this conversation with Portland Police, and hopefully we're able to bring something to the community in the coming month or so.
Yeah, and Marcia, I was just going to ask if it would be helpful for the committee to see, the stops mask, and look at what data points we already do collect, because I think part of, getting your feedback would be, are there other, data points you'd like us to collect at the time of a stop. We have, as you well know, added, to try and get better information about the disparity. We've added some drop downs to get more detail on the type of stop in order to maybe get to some of the reasons for this stuff, because before it was stop, blah, blah, blah. And so it didn't, so we've added boxes like, you arrest them because they had a warrant because you couldn't tell before or whatever. So we've added some boxes, but it would be, I think helpful for the discussion, any discussion, to know what data we collect right now, and then have your feedback as to whether that's the right data to be collecting, or whether there's other points that might be important to look at or what have you too. So I'd be happy to get you that document. And then, if you want the, analyst present so that they can talk about how they, how they analyze the particular data, and frankly, and whether there's other suggestions for different ways to, do it, or other parts of it to analyze than what's in the stops report. We could talk about that. And, obviously that's just quantitative, as Rochelle said, but, and then I don't know how you get to the, qualitative, from the, I guess that would be from the community's perspective. But we can also talk about some of the efforts that, or you can hear, I'm sure, that what Rochelle's talking about, I think, goes a lot to procedural justice. And, there are suggestions for, the information that an officer should give at the time they stop. As you well know, once that policy is revised, we're going to be advising people that they don't have to consent to searches, and give them a document that, advises them of that kind of stuff. So we can also share some of those new things that, are, coming down the pike that, people can comment on that if they'd like. We've been looking at that stuff, what kind of things, we went away from having a rote speech for each officer, because, people communicate in different ways, but there's certain information that has to be conveyed to anybody who is, approached, so that, they understand, the concepts of procedural justice, being heard and explaining why they're stopped, that kind of stuff. So, we could go over that and see if there are other things that people would suggest, that would make those less threatening or what have you. I mean, so, we're more than happy to bring whatever information or what we have now, and so that people can understand where we are and and then you can talk about where you'd like us to go even.
Yeah, that's great, Mary Claire. Thank you. Barb, did you have something you want to add really quick? Sorry, I saw you come up on video. Okay.
It looks
I
like
do
Rochelle
think
has her
that,
hand raised again. Sorry, I didn't mean to
go
interrupt.
ahead.
It looks like Rochelle has her hand raised again.
Go ahead, Rochelle.
I'd just like to ask Mary Claire, if you happen to know if information is kept on, say, a car, a person in a car is stopped, is the kind of car noted in the information? You know, like, are Mercedes stopped a lot and Porsches or old clunkers?
That's a
I
very
mean, I
good
really have heard stories about
Sure.
people saying that, you know, they drove an old clunker and for that reason they got stopped more than other people.
Yeah.
However, if data is kept on, is a person homeless or what are they wearing, and other information that can give you more to the story than a number of how many people were stopped. Thank you.
Yeah, Rochelle, I have to chuckle because as a public defender, we used to laugh, you know, if you had, you know, old, you know, there were certain kinds of cars that we knew were always going to get stopped, right? So it just made me chuckle, but I don't know if it's a required, I will look to see and get back to you and back to the committee on whether the type of vehicle, I know that if they stop them there, you know, there's a license plate and that stuff, but I don't know that whether the type of vehicle, but I think that's, you know, actually a very interesting one, because I'm, you know, that certainly anecdotally you hear that. And I can figure out, I mean, the citation has certain information on it, obviously, that's required by Oregon law, but, you know, it has, you know, an address. I don't know if it, and if you don't give one, whatever, I don't know that it would actually say houseless or whatever, but I will look into what other information is, you know, sort of required versus if there's, you know, a police report, they might put it in the narrative, but I don't know if the citation actually has much other information for you. But I'll check it out.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think what Rochelle's talking about too is like the raw data versus like the actual narrative behind it. And one of the things that was brought up in another meeting I was in was, you know, the raw data stuff that's entered, right? The basic details. And then there's radio call data. So anytime there's a stop made, police have to call that in. So if we're thinking about like, is there a way we can enhance the data by figuring out who's actually calling the stops in? Is it a handful of officers that are constantly pulling over X number of Black individuals? The other observation or narrative that comes up is that the number of Black people is really high that are being stopped because they're coming from out of town. But is there a way to verify, like, are we checking that their registration are all these Black people that are coming from other very white places of Oregon to Portland to be pulled over? Are we checking their registration? Is there a way to verify that information? So those are questions that were sent to me. I thought were important and interesting and kind of go along with what Rochelle is talking about. Like, is there, you know, a certain car that's being stopped? More like when I started driving, people were like, don't get a red car because you'll get stopped.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's true or not, but
low riders. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, just I think this is helpful. Barb, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I don't know how I seem to know this, but this seems recent to me that there was a discussion about race and that was only identified by the police officer writing the report or citation. And it seems to me that, well, I'm actually wondering when they get booked into jail, whether the what do I want to say? Whether the criminal gets a chance to answer the demographics for themselves and say how they identify or not. That's one thing that I just want to elevate. And yeah, I don't drive a hoopty at 3 in the morning in Beaverton with a black guy with dreads in the front seat.
Thanks, Barb. Any other thoughts before I've taken in your questions, and then go ahead. Again, I see you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna chime in real quick, and then I have to hop off for another call. But I just would like to add that as we're discussing all the technical aspects and all the numbers, that we just remember the qualitative piece of this, which is the fact that driving as a Black person in particular is a very traumatic experience, especially when coming in contact with police officers. And so that's like just a thing that needs to be part of this. And, you know, what cars and what area and yada, 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 especially being a young Black person, is a real thing. And so I think we also need to be thinking, and part of this work should be rethinking how do we rethink traffic stops? Because, you know, whatever you plan on saying or doing or how we're addressing it, it doesn't take away from that experience being very traumatic and what could happen. So I would just like to keep that in the forefront of people's minds.
Sure.
Yeah, great, great addition. Have a good night. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
All
thanks,
right,
everybody.
let's see here. We're gonna, if nobody has any last minute thoughts on stops, I'm gonna be taking this feedback and hopefully doing like a work session with PPB to kind of frame this out and figure out how we can get this information in a meaningful way and give some feedback. I thought I heard someone's microphone come on. Is it just me? Okay. So I'm gonna move on to the next piece of our agenda. I don't know, again, if we'll need the entire time tonight, but I really just wanted to go over some of the highlights of, Amy, did you have something? I saw you light up on the screen. Okay. I'm going to figure out how I can share this with you. I can share my screen. So for those of you who can see your screen, I'm going to try to share my screen. Oh, it's disabled.
I can go
Yeah,
ahead
can
and
I-
give you screen access, Marcia.
What's that?
I'm going to give you screen access.
Okay, cool.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
All right, 1 second. So folks should be able to see this, and I can't see you. So if you end up saying, just jump in as we go. But I thought it would be important to kind of go over some of our events, highlights, and accomplishments. Can folks see the screen okay? Do you need me to zoom in at all?
If you can zoom in, I think that would be helpful.
How's that?
Thank you.
More? There we go. Okay. I really think that there's a way for me to see you all, but I don't. All right, so I just wanted to go over kind of like really quickly the last 2 years of what we've done, which is a lot. When I first came on the Racial Equity Subcommittee, we immediately decided to rename the subcommittee from the Race, Ethnicity, and Other Subcommittee. And I also thought it would be helpful to develop a mission statement so that we could be grounded in what it is that we were trying to accomplish in these meetings. And so, as you know, we heard from community, we renamed ourselves to the Racial Equity Subcommittee, and our mission is to advance racial equity by giving voices to families of color and low socioeconomic backgrounds by identifying areas of discrimination that require change, trust, and the embedding of equity in various capacities. So we have come a long ways. We've done several letters of acknowledgement talking about just reform happening around the city. And then early on, one of our very first kind of real community engagement piece that was very intentional was with the gun violence reduction team. We had a panel of individuals who had been impacted by gun violence and have experienced being disproportionately stopped by Portland police. And we had members of the GVRT at that meeting. They provided us a pretty thorough review of what their unit does. And then we had a panel discussion, which was pretty well attended. And we felt like that was really informative and we wanted to continue that. I think not long enough after that, we got into COVID, maybe 6 months later, actually. So we held another listening session focusing on, you know, the concerns of the community and Portland police related to the settlement agreement. So we've done that throughout. And then I just list here, and we'll go really quickly over this, but some of the recommendations we've done have, I think most of them have passed. We did the procedural justice one. I'm gonna look at the, actually, I think there is a link that I can share. Let me try to share this with you. Copy. I will share the link in the chat for you all, and you should have access.
And I'll just mention that the final version of this document will be on the PCCEP website later this week, if not tomorrow.
Thanks, Claudia. So you should see it, and you should see notes throughout at the bottom. But briefly, these are just some things that we've gone over. Body-worn cameras, reviewing of the community advisory groups that are within PPP. We have addressed the Arbitration Senate Bill 1567 back in the summer after specific to the Racial Equity Committee and after the incident of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, we held a Say Her Name event. That was in August of 2020. We also had a pretty great turnout with that. And we're able to send Kendra James's mother to, you know, with some really cool gear for her to go to the Walk on Washington, the March on Washington. We then did a recommendation for qualified immunity. We had another panel discussion on racial equity goals. And this again is a moving document. So we are trying to track some of the things that we were working on. We had a really great collaborative experience with the behavioral health subcommittee and developed a recommendation on trauma intervention programming for all PPP officers. That was recently approved as well. And then this past year in 2021, we've really tried to focus on specific experiences from the Latino community and other communities of color. And I don't see it on here. Oh, the panel discussion on racial equity goals, I think that was a reference to the panel that we had with Portland Police and some of the lead protesters. And that was a really excellent and informative panel that we had. And really kind of sparked the interest in wanting to revisit the conversation about race and racism and how the Bureau can improve how they perceive. And I think, Jared, you talked about this a little bit with the comments you made earlier about certain officers, not thinking that they're racist, but not really connecting the dots to the institution. Let's see here. After we wanted to do the community spotlight, it was clear to me that we just simply don't have the capacity to actually host major events like that every month. And although we've done some really great work, it's been somewhat challenging, just because, we are all in probably Zoom fatigue. We've got a lot of things going. We are a volunteer body, and it takes a lot of planning to do an intentional, well-facilitated meeting like those. And so we kind of had to take a step back a little bit, and we wanted to just get community feedback on the proposals that we're making. Are we doing what the community needs us to do? How are we representing communities of color? And the last couple dialogues we've had are the current state of gun violence. And now we're talking about stops data, which has been really helpful, and looking forward to facilitating a future dialogue around that. Some of our highlighted moments, because we've had such great turnout with the community, specific around hearing individual perspectives, kind of like what Rochelle just mentioned. And to Lakiana's point about being trauma informed, I requested a work session with the mayor's office and Portland Police to make sure that we're not holding these spaces in vain, and that we have some accountability around what we're doing with the information. As a facilitator and a presenter for this group, I personally find it somewhat unethical if I'm asking folks to come talk about their negative experiences in the community and then not kind of have a response. And so the reason why I've shared this with you today is because eventually we will be transitioning, and PCCEP continues to evolve. And I would love to get feedback to ensure that I can help facilitate a smooth transition and offer leadership opportunities to other individuals who are interested in building their skills as a facilitator, as a coordinator of this work, and also honor the fact that this work is really important, and I want to make sure that it can be as smooth as possible. And so I'm hoping today that we can talk briefly just about what kinds of things are working well. And my feelings don't get hurt easily, so you please be as constructive as possible. And what things would you like to see? I think that as of late, it's been difficult to ensure attendance, and I personally would like to see a larger attendance, specifically with people of color. And also, I know it's difficult. It's a difficult time right now. So that's my own feedback. But I'm going to stop sharing the screen and come back to you all. You have the link, so if you would like to add anything, you're welcome to do that. And I think we're good. And I'd love to just hear folks and what their suggestions are for the future focus.
Just to add some volume or some noise to the silence, Marcia, I think this committee's done a fantastic job. I don't, I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it, but across the spectrum of policy, engagement, listening, direct action, and what you did for Kendra James's family. I think that it's really been an excellent subcommittee for the last 18 months for sure. Administrative things, putting the name to make it what you want, like all of it. To me, it's the broad spectrum of stuff I would expect or want the committee to do, and I think you've discharged it. I share the concern about having people come. I don't know what exactly is done behind the scenes. In terms of a mailing list or announcements. I know Sharon Gary Smith, who's a former colleague of everyone, is now the head of the Portland NAACP, and whether this meeting gets advertised directly to her, or that reach out, those are ideas. It's hard to question why people don't want to spend their free time on a Zoom meeting, because it's obviously in the subject matter is tough. All I think that we can expect the committee to do is send those personal invitations. If it's more personalized, maybe that could help. But that sort of targeted outreach, Urban League or other organizations, and going to the organizations instead of trying to pick off people one by one. Those are suggestions I don't think necessarily for the committee, maybe for the staff or larger. And maybe it's not inviting them to your meetings. Maybe it's having everyone who likes PCCEP going to their meetings and then talking about the issues they want to talk about. Because I wouldn't want to think any organization can monopolize the time. But I think that's a challenge everyone has, not just in Portland and not just this subcommittee, but across the country. I think in getting people to invest their time in Zoom stuff, and the summer comes along too. I think it'll get more difficult, but I think you've done great with your leadership, and I thank you for your service to the subcommittee.
Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate that. Really positive feedback. I've enjoyed my time, and it's time. For those of you wondering, I am not leaving PCCEP though. I am simply stepping down as chair. So I hope to be involved in the work moving forward. But I agree, we have a huge opportunity to increase targeted outreach and finding out where those spaces are that we can, share the agenda. So Trudy, that's great. I'm listing that in here. Do other folks have thoughts or feedback or suggestions? It's a quiet group tonight.
I'll offer another suggestion.
I'll take it.
I think sometimes I think having and I know it's hard because there'd be the competing interest of being flexible to respond to the current situation. But if the committee were to develop an agenda sort of for the half year or the quarter, and so whatever topic at least you're discussing, maybe half of the meeting would be pre-planned out months in advance, and then that could be advertised in ways. I mean, it would bind you to do that, which I know is the downside, but then people can self-select, oh, I really want to talk about stops, and I know they're going to be doing that at the August meeting, and I think if you could maintain enough flexibility if you just had half of the meeting pre-scheduled for the year or the half year or the quarter, and then the other half could be respond to what's happening in the news. But I think that could help, for your own agendas moving forward.
That's a really great suggestion. I put that on here. I had not thought of that. So that would bind us. And I think sometimes that might feel difficult, but I think that is doable. I mean, especially for large topics, especially like stops data that's been a touchy subject for a really long time. The other thing that I was thinking of that has worked a little bit, and I haven't done as good a job this month because I've been out, but increasing the collaboration with existing PPB advisories. One of the things I felt was helpful is it's definitely helpful to go to the other advisories. Like I attended the CAG meeting, I think. I can't even keep up with all of the things. but that's where the chairs of all of the PPB advisory councils attended, and I felt very well received. And I actually think that if we could have more opportunities to connect with the other groups, that also helps increase and share a little bit of the content and community voice, because if we can get their community to come to the topics that we're covering at PCCEP and vice versa, I think that's great. But again, like you said, Jared, it is hard because there's just a lot of meetings happening, and it is getting more and more difficult. But I like the quarterly agenda idea. That's might be brilliant. I don't know yet. I mean, I'm not going to be the one doing it, so it's easy for me to say.
I'll
Barb,
take
did
might
you
be
have-
brilliant. Might be brilliant, pretty good.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Barb, did you have something?
Well, I didn't quite hear all of Jared's suggestion because I was doing something noisy. But I didn't realize it was quarterly. I was thinking like, 6 months ahead or whatever was what his ask was, which apparently I missed that. But the thought I had was you can always put out draft agendas ahead of time. And if they need to change, they need to change. That's just a thought. I mean, obviously, if you put them out and you change them every time, that's not going to have, public confidence, but.
Yeah, and I think that we have kind of kept the agendas kind of running agendas, if you will, and we've adapted as necessary. Sometimes there's been plenty of agendas where we were like, something happened and we have to change. We just have to change the topic. We can't do this today. And so I do think that whoever is in the position, hopefully is open to that. But as a facilitator, you definitely need to be adaptable to whatever the current event is happening, if it distracts from the agenda. But Claudia has been really helpful in getting like the agenda reminders out so that we as chairs can get the agendas out to the public sooner. But I think targeted outreach is definitely an opportunity that we have to be better at. Any others have thoughts? I think maybe we'll go for another I don't know that we need to go for another 40 minutes. So we'll talk about this for a few more minutes, and then I'll take some more suggestions and then maybe start wrapping up.
I don't have any suggestions, but I think I'm hearing that you're saying you're stepping down from chair. And I'm gonna miss having you as chair. It's been a great working with you. And yeah, it's just been, I feel like ever since I've been working with you in this capacity, it's been great. I love what you've been doing. I love all that you've accomplished in your time in this role. And we're gonna miss you. And I'm not sure who's going to step into your place, but yeah, I just think you've been doing great. And I'm glad to know that even though you're stepping down, you're still going to be active with the committee. So
Thanks, Marlon. I was caught off guard when I heard your voice under M&M. But thank you for your very kind words. I have been honored to serve in this role, and it's been great. And I'm really proud of the accomplishments that we've done. And I can't do that by myself. So thank you to the community and for those of you who have been ongoing attenders. And one of the things that I think has been really helpful is the meetings I've been having individually with Portland Police, so that we can kind of lessen the anxiety of being in a meeting that I know is perceived as sometimes adversarial. That is not the intention. We really truly want to create a safer community. And that means that all people need to feel safe. And I am not stepping down. I will continue to help, but that will lead us into the next kind of the second question of like, if folks have suggestions, and maybe Theo, you can give an update on, if you can give an update on, like, I think we have some new folks coming on board. And I know that there's been outreach to get more PCCEP members in general. It's also difficult to have new people just thrown into the chair position. And so that's why I'm doing this early, to try to help onboard the next person. I really see my time ending sometime in June, maybe June being the last meeting, but certainly will be part of that process as much as possible.
Yeah, there's certainly been some more applications coming in. We did interviews for applicants earlier this week, and they will, PCCEP will get to make a determination about who is they're going to be their recommendation to Mayor Wheeler. I did have a suggestion for subcommittees in general, not just the racial equity subcommittee, but subcommittees. One of the biggest challenges for PCCEP in terms of applicants and keeping folks engaged has been alternates. Alternates kind of like the application process in and of itself is flawed because you're asking folks to be vulnerable, and then in the capacity that it's in right now, you're rejecting a handful and saying, but still stay engaged, which is not responsive. It's not really trauma informed, as Judith and Claudia say frequently. It's not that effective of a process. So a way that we've seen as staff that could really help to mitigate is for subcommittees really to ask these alternates to join the subcommittees, and that would be a way of keeping folks engaged who are not necessarily voting members. Also, we want to try in this process of writing new bylaws. We want to try to make it mandatory for applicants to apply for both a subcommittee and the general committee at the same time. So they have to pick a subcommittee to apply to at the same time as they apply for a general application, and that would be multifaceted. It would allow them a streamlined process into joining the subcommittee that they applied to, should they be confirmed or not confirmed, and they would still be engaged. So that would be one way, or I guess that's one of my suggestions, is just to have folks join subcommittees more regularly and be more involved with subcommittees. And also in terms of applications, since I'm talking about it, it would be cool for applicants to already come to meetings. Oftentimes we get applicants who have never been to a PCCEP meeting before ever. So we want to rewrite the application process, so you have to attend at least a few meetings, general meetings and subcommittee meetings, before you submit an application or before your application is considered. But I don't know that those are specific suggestions, but I guess they're more broad suggestions for the PCCEP as a whole. But you can take what you want and leave the rest. Did you want any specific updates?
Well, I want to acknowledge that actually I think is a great recommendation, and I think that subcommittees can inform that, right? We can say, we can help rewrite or inform what we would like the application to include. I agree. It seems odd that applicants wouldn't know what or how meetings are facilitated before joining the committee and understanding the commitment. Not only to themselves, but to committee members and to the community. So I think that that's a good recommendation. Barb, did you have something?
I'm just agreeing.
Okay. Amy, I see your hand up.
Oh, I had something in the chat though. I forgot.
Well,
yeah, my question, Marcy, is sorry, I'm on two different meetings, but I picked up what you said earlier about the application process and all of this. And this was something I was going over with Elliot on Tuesday was about our, what I call the cracked foundation, is that we actually need to kind of do updates on all of our processes, because we're kind of not really running on a solid foundation of like operational instructions. And maybe we ought to focus on doing that first as a main group, and then incorporate the layer for the subcommittees. Because I'm just feeling like we're spinning our wheels and we're chasing our tails and we're all getting tired because the foundation is cracked. It just needs an update. It's not broke, it's just out of date. Because when they wrote it in 2018, we weren't here. And this is our group, our meeting. And Jared always said, this is the floor, not the ceiling. So maybe we should just do an update, you know, like a 2.0 version of all of our stuff that helps us operate. So we know what staff does. So it's clearly articulated what everybody's roles are. Because it's not clear based on the conversations I had the other night with folks. Things aren't clear as to whose roles are what and what do people do and whose responsibility is what. And that's why people don't want to join. We look unorganized. We really do. From the public's eye, we're unorganized. That, and no bearing on anyone individually, just the foundation of our information needs an overhaul. That's all I'm saying. So that's just my 2 cents, but that's what I picked up. And listening to you, it just kind of adds into what you're saying. I don't get a lot of people at our meetings either. And I'm hoping we do this month, and maybe we should collaborate on some of our ideas and do things together as teams. And maybe that might draw more interest if we look like we're working together. I don't know. Just my thoughts. Thanks.
That's great, Amy. No, I think, you know, and in the past you and I have collaborated, and that was an excellent example of coordinated collaboration among the subcommittees. And we had some real success from that, and we had good attendance from that. And we learned a lot of really great things, and we had some, you know, good recommendations out of that. I agree with you, and I added to this list to improve operational instructions. I think that there are some foundational things that can be improved for sure. Barb, I think I saw your hand up, and then I saw Jared's hand raised. So, but now I don't see yours, Barb.
Oh, well, I
Is
just
it up?
want to point
Okay.
out, and I'm trying to not crash or freeze up, what I put in the chat, because it makes sense to me to have, you know, a bunch of people that are alternates, and those people could be sitting on committees. I don't know if they should be able to vote. I'm doing air quotes, vote or not. Y'all are going to have to figure that whole thing out. But I think giving them a stipend and helping them get there would be helpful. I'm not saying giving them the same stipend that PCCEP members get. And I don't know if I'm saying for each subcommittee or just because they're an alternate and they're, I don't know, I'm going to do air quotes again, active. Those are some of my thoughts.
Thanks, Barb. Yeah, I appreciate that. I have that. I put that in the notes as well. Jared, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to just mention two things. First, just the history of the Community Oversight Advisory Board, the COAB, their subcommittees were open membership-wise or whatever to every member of the public. And that was one of the asks that the League of Women Voters made about PCCEP when it became a substitute, was that the subcommittees be open to membership or, you know, equal participation of community members so that they could sit and do the work. And so that was one of the reasons, you know, that became put into the PCCEP plan. And you can do with that what you want. The second thing I wanted to speak to is your initial, you know, ask or question about how to facilitate or hand off this committee in a deliberate way, intentional way. And I think, you know, from my perspective, facilitation was always a huge issue for COAB, partly because the community liaison, or the COCL, compliance officer community liaison, was put in charge of the COAB. So they were facilitating and sort of in charge of the agenda. And that was really, unpreferred by the community. And so then, with PCCEP, we gave the option to self-facilitate, but at the same time, and it's put into the plan and the bylaws, I believe, because it was such an important carryover from COAB, that the city would provide facilitation as sort of a default, if the PCCEP wanted it, or a subcommittee. And so I would encourage for this committee, Marcia, you not be concerned with passing it off, so to speak, to a newer member and have them get thrown into the fire of having to facilitate. I mean, I don't think subcommittees need a chair designated as such if that's going to be some sort of disincentive to participate. I think Claudia or Theo could facilitate it's their job. And sorry to volunteer you, Theo, you do a great job though, and Claudia too. But I would hope that that's, on the table to consider, because that was sort of the original design, that we would have adequate staff who were intentionally hired because of their skill set to do this work. And hopefully that would give you some calm in handing it over to someone who didn't necessarily want to facilitate, right at the start, but could be a member of this committee while having, staff help facilitate.
That's a really great historical context that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And I wrote that down. Thanks, Jared. Do others have thoughts, comments, or feedback around that? One of the questions, I guess, that I had because of Jared's comment about maybe adding hurdles to applicants. Theo, are you able to share with us, has our applicant pool stayed fairly low? Has it recently increased? Is there anything contributing to the numbers that we are aware of that kind of make it difficult to have, is the hurdle real, or is it just, or not?
Yeah, I think Jared makes a great point. So there's lots of different schools of thought around applicants. So we have been doing intentional targeted outreach to folks, and folks express interest, but not very many submit applications. We can't force it. We can't apply for anybody. On behalf of anybody, we can't fill out an application because somebody says they're interested and just set up an interview. I think we've had 4 applicants, and I think that we were able to successfully schedule interviews with 3 folks, and that's just kind of what we have. The 3 alternates that we had that were official alternates had all said that they were no longer interested in being alternates after a while, and that's okay. People lose interest or move away or don't have the time or the bandwidth or whatever, and that's fine. I don't know if it's because there's hurdles or if it's because people come to meetings and see what the PCCEP members have to endure and get scared off, or see how much time it is, how much work gets done. I don't know what it is. We don't have the research to support that, to support any kind of hypotheses or conclusions or anything of the sort. Hold on.
Theo, I have a question for you. Have you ever adopted what I call pre-test and post-test kind of survey thing? I remember going to meetings where they would kind of hand you a sheet of paper and kind of ask you if you'd heard about the meeting, what do you know about it? Are you informed? Maybe we could ask people, as an introduction, are you familiar with our work? How were you referred here? Maybe we should ask people, how did you hear about us? And kind of start tracking how people find out, because I do a lot of posting on Facebook. I got a ton of friends, and all of us, we have tons and tons of network partners, but I'm not sure they really get what PCEP does. We don't do a lot of advertising. We don't do a lot of announcements. Okay, so we're not going to get a lot of feedback, because we're not out there. Maybe we should do a news blip, right? Get on a news commercial or cable radio. I don't know, somewhere that people are listening and see what happens. I don't know.
I think these are fair suggestions. I know that PCEP members have gone on OPB a number of times. I know that PCEP has been mentioned. PCEP has run ads in things like Street Roots, or we've paid for advertisement on different social medias. PCEP as a website, Claudia does a wonderful job doing the communications. But there's certainly always more that we could do. I think a pre and post would be really cool to do, and I can make that happen for sure. If you have other suggestions, please send them my way, and I'd be happy to send out as far and wide. If you have other suggestions for increasing the reach of PCEP, I'm always looking for more suggestions.
I like the idea of pre and post, and the other thing I wasn't sure, and I put that in the chat, but like, are we tracking just like feedback from members who have been off and on the committee, like, so that there's continuous improvement for members to give feedback to PCEP staff to say like these are the things that work really well, or these are the things that were really challenging, so that we're also continuing to improve in that way. And then I really like Amy's suggestion, and I really like the suggestion by Jared about, doing something really positive when the city approves, and maybe even more importantly, when the city implements a policy that was approved, because that's the real win, right? One of them.
Yeah, I think that also works twofold. It adds more pressure to the city to act on their adopted recommendation. Once it's approved and then signed by the mayor, it holds the feet to the fire. I think one thing that we hear from applicants and alternates, even members of the committee, pretty much it's like a ubiquitous thing where people hate the current appointment process of going in and putting yourself out there in front of people where you have never even met a lot of these folks, and there's no criteria for a successful applicant. There's no it's kind of just a popularity contest. I hear that a lot. So that's another reason we want that to change at some point. Like that onboarding process. If we're starting people off on PCEP in a traumatic way, then it's not going to be well received.
Theo, I have one possible solution to that. If you put 3 people up, maybe the vote is 1 person joins the committee and 2 people are approved to join the subcommittee. So everybody is approved. And then, this idea about who votes or whatever, I know there's a risk that, your subcommittee could get overwhelmed by people coming to seek recommendation. I think that's a problem to resolve when it happens, because I don't know if it's realistic that people would do that. But, having that vote be an approval to join the subcommittee, and, I think everyone who's at the subcommittee should get a vote in a sense, like maybe not strict counting wise, but yeah, I take your point. And I know that in the past we've lost applicants or alternates because of that vote, and that is too bad. That is not what we're aiming for. Obviously, it's not supposed to be an exclusive club. Everyone's invited to be a part of PCEP.
That's exactly right. I think that's a thought process that we share. I like the idea of having folks approved to the subcommittee, because then you're winning either way. You're winning no matter what. You're applying and you're trying to be a part of this community group, and you're going to succeed. My dog's at the window, sorry.
This is great, you all. I have resubmitted the link to the Google Doc. You all can edit and add anything that you'd like. As Claudia mentioned, she's going to put this in a nice little document that's finalized for folks to look kind of the timeline of the accomplishments that we've all done together in this group. The feedback in there, Theo, just so you have it and you can take that. I've taken notes. And then if folks want to add things later, feel free to do that. But I think for next steps, what I will plan to do is set up a time with PPB staff to talk about what, maybe with Mary Claire, and talk about what we need to do to plan for the STOPS data conversation. And that will be kind of like the next big event. If folks have feedback or suggestions, please reach out to me. My availability and workload has increased significantly with my new role. As you know, I have a new role, which is part of the contributing factor of needing to step down. And so email is the best for me. If you can just send whatever you have as a suggestion. I hope to plan something that's impactful and meaningful for you all to learn from and get a real and helpful and raw dialogue about STOPS data. Begin to change that narrative. But that's all I have for you this evening. So if anybody has any last thoughts, this is your time. Otherwise, I will let you go 15 minutes early tonight. All right, I think that's it.